So, yet more bad news for the farming industry, unfortunately, today, because as you may very well remember, we had a massive buildup of pigs. Now, not just pigs, it was a whole heap of different animals, but mainly so the pig industry was the big one that suffered because of the lack of abattoir space. Why was there a lack of abattoir space? Because there was a lack of workers to work in these abattoirs. Now, what goes on and why is that being caused? Well, it all comes down to our good old friend Brexit. Yes, Brexit is the prime culprit here, and partly because, well, you don't have the labor force anymore. And we've talked about this, I don't know how many times. As rural areas, and something like an abattoir has to be a sort in a rural area because the sort of the closer it is, the easier it is to transport the animals to, etc., etc. And of course, there are big abattoirs, but in this case, we're talking about small abattoirs. And there are loads up and down the country that serve, as we'll find out in a bit, hundreds of different farms. Some of these small ones, in the small one in this case, I think serves about 20 different farms. But it closing down is going to have a big impact. And it is down to the fact that it cannot get workers, because where are all your workers? Well, they're no longer in rural areas. They're in towns and predominantly now even more cities. And you can't just say, go out and work, in a rural abattoir, because that might not be the case, because there's transport costs. There's a whole heap of, economic reasons why people aren't going to work in these places. Not to say the fact that some people just straight up do not want to go to work in these places. And we relied very, very much on European and EU, migrant labor to work in these places. So it is of no surprise that we are seeing this type of closure in this. But it gets even more interesting as we'll get into the article, because the government, if it wanted to help out these places, would mean a change in legislation. This whole bonfire of EU regulation that they talk about wanting to get rid of, and yet, bizarrely in this case, where they could actually maybe help farmers and change the bureaucracy, maybe to help them, they are terrified, seemingly, to change it. Which the Brexiteers will often say, we're not afraid of changing this. But in this case, it seems certainly like they are. So let's go diving into this. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and my donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. But there's also the YouTube thank you link below as well, if you'd like to use that. Or there is the YouTube subscription thing that we've got down below, where you can join the Pony Club and you get emojis, badges, and you get a free super chat a month. That was it. So as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way, even if you just click the like and share button. So onwards to Farming UK with their story on this, with the title of Extremely Worrying: Glossop Abattoir Closes After 100 Years. So Mettrick's abattoir in Glossop, Derbyshire, will close after 100 years, with campaigners calling the news extremely worrying for local farmers. An abattoir run by brothers John and Stephen Mettrick, the fifth generation since the business was actually founded, and around 200 farmers rely on it for slaughtering. The number of small abattoirs in the UK has declined dramatically in recent decades and continues to shrink by about 10% each year, according to the Food Standards Agency. The campaigners for small abattoirs say that they are essential for economic and practical reasons to supply locally produced meat, and are now facing a wide range of challenges and extra costs. The Mettrick's cutting and packing facility will remain open, but local farmers wishing to continue using their surfaces will incur additional costs for longer journeys and transporting carcasses for a larger abattoir to the Glossop facility. John Mettrick said that the refusal from the UK government to utilise existing legislation to support small abattoirs meant that businesses had no choice but to close. The FSA acknowledges that at the present, the one-size-fits-all system does not work. And although a 5-year program says that the hope to be able to deliver a risk-based approach to the region in the future. However, this will require legislative change, and to have any chance of meaningful impact, he said. Responding to the news, the Sustainable Food Trust said that the site's closure would cause a headache and distress for farmers around the area. The closure would also spark wider anxiety amongst farmers who depended on the small abattoir in other regions, the body said. Richard Young, the STF policy director, said, "This is an extremely worrying development. If a state-of-the-art small abattoir like this one is unable to continue in business, yet more closures will follow. This isn't about money. It's about the government being willing to set its own risk-based rules for small abattoirs. Ironically, now we have left the EU, ministers are more frightened to vary from the bureaucratic letter of EU regulations than we had when we had a voice in Europe. All food, farming, and rural organizations must work together to turn this situation around," he said. It is in no one's interest to let these small abattoirs slip away like this. So, as you can see, very, very worrying for these places. And like I say, whenever stuff like this happens, I always say in any sort of economies, just, be it a small town, a city, or even a region in this case, something closing like that has big consequences, not just on the local economy, because obviously the jobs that places would have provided, but then it has a knock on the farmers. Well, where do they send their stuff to get slaughtered now? If that's serving around 200 farmers, what do those farmers do then? As I said, if you want to use their services for that, you're going to have to pay more. And already it's not looking good for a lot of UK farmers. It is not looking good at all. And the worse this becomes, the worse this gets. And I think again it gets it exactly right. I think that final quote puts it exactly right. Where it says it here. Ironically, now we have left the EU, ministers are more frightened to vary from the bureaucratic letter of EU regulations than when we had a voice in Europe. Why is that? Why are they so scared of that? Well, I'll tell you why. All comes down to regulations. They know if they start changing regulations here, then makes it harder to transport stuff over to Europe. This is what we've been banging on about since 2016. And yet, this sometimes it still seems to sink in and sink through. Like you had Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said, "Oh yes, we're going to bring in these checks. Oh no, we're not going to bring in these checks because to do that would be a huge economic damage to the country." I thought you were all about taking back control of our borders, Jacob. What? Yeah, but this goes, I think, very interesting to see how this plays out in certainly under a Truss government, because we are 3 sleeps away? Well, no, 2 sleeps away from this happening, from Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, and she's promised this bonfire of EU regulations. Well, we'll see if it actually happens. But remember, May promised to do this, Boris promised to do this, and now Truss is promising this bonfire of regulations. Well, May didn't do it. Boris, the Brexiteer, the man who got Brexit done, didn't do it. I don't think Liz Truss will do this either. I think when it happens and when it will come to it, they will go, "We want to get rid of these regulations." And the people in Whitehall will come forward and go, "Okay, if you want to get rid of these regulations, this is the consequences of what your actions will do." And then they will look at it and go, maybe we'll just keep them as we are. And one of the big arguments for Brexit was that we can change regulations. But so far, no change. And that comment gets to the core of it. They are frightened themselves of actually changing these bureaucratic rules because, as much as they've banged on about wanting to change all these regulations and getting rid of regulations, they don't know actually what they would do. I'm thinking maybe we're coming to the point of maybe where a lot of these Brexiteers were just, dogs trying to, catch a car. And the thing is, they've now caught the car and they don't know what to do with it, So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.